Good afternoon. I'm Margarita Zulueta, and today, let's talk about fat. I am a fat woman who is reclaiming the word in the tradition of fat activists. Being fat has caused me a lot of pain, but through this thesis, I saw it's not about being fat itself, but about how I am treated for being fat. Especially as a woman, because we struggle with conforming to beauty standards to access better treatment. Being fat is not something I feel. Others convey that I am fat and how it's not okay. As a small to mid-fat person, I don't even experience the brunt of anti-fat bias. Clicker, hard to get used to. Which normalizes the discrimination of fat people. People are starting to respond against anti-fat bias through fat-positive content and greater recognition. But the bias still directly affects the 1.9 billion adults who are larger-bodied. To begin exploring this topic, I engaged with fat activism resources and spoke with professionals who study bias or create our world. Most importantly, I spoke with fat femme-identifying people who all said that fat women consistently receive the message that we just don't fit. But they hope for a kinder world rooted not in fat shame, but in fat liberation. Which is why I am presenting Weighted, Designing Towards Fat Liberation, where I will take you through 5 projects that explore how to combat the anti-fat bias that affects fat women to lead us to a world of fat liberation. These projects look at where anti-fat bias obstructs, discourages, forgets, ridicules, and scrutinizes fat women. Let's look at where anti-fat bias obstructs. Traveling comfortably in flight is one obstructed area. Fat passengers face the physical pain of not fitting in seats, being harassed by other passengers, and face passenger of size policies, which include requiring a second seat, being moved, or even being bumped. So, how might we create space in air travel that is not obstructive for fat passengers? I investigated that with Flex, a speculative air fleet with fat-friendly features. Flex changes the current airplane layout to fit passengers through the Flex seat. The seat's privacy screens are on a track to reduce fat travelers' space anxiety and hostile co-passenger interactions. And the interior of the cabin offers a mix of current and Flex seating. To book, choose the amount of space needed via the slider. This ensures that fat passengers do not get bumped. I researched pandemic seating policies to test Flex's potential. Delta kept their middle seat open longer and thought they would lose money. What happened was their customer loyalty score increased after the changes were made, and their yield was higher than their competitors, so prioritizing customer needs can be a positive option. Through Flex, I explored how to go from being obstructed to how to open up spaces. Through this project, it became clear that people create obstructive spaces unintentionally. So, if these biases affect how we create the world, can they affect other spaces too? How do biases discourage fat women from being in spaces? Dating is a highly discouraged space for fat women and is less accessible the bigger you are. The belief that fat is ugly creates the dichotomy of fat women either being discouraged from dating or being fetishized. Both sides are harassed because people believe fat women should be grateful for any attention. Fat femme-identifying people deserve a safe and acknowledged dating space, so how might we create it? Affirmed is a dating platform that acknowledges fat dating challenges by encouraging fat-positive behaviors and community building. Fat-positive behaviors include acknowledgement. Affirmed asks users to consent to no anti-fat bias, and when users accept a rule, a pop-up appears showing what that consent means. Affirmed approaches matching differently by switching the widespread swipe interaction, which reinforces the hot or not phenomenon of the 2000s, to liking at least 2 details of a person's profile. Reporting by fat women is also taken seriously, and Affirmed makes sure to block people based on breaking those initial rules. Blocked people are also told why they are blocked and redirected to a browser window with targeted educational resources. Fat daters also experience specific situations and oftentimes don't have access to a community that gets it, which is why Affirmed includes a community forum, which connects fat daters with each other and provides support through video calls, audio calls, and comment threads. Through Affirmed, I explored how to move from being discouraged to being supported. But during user testing, some did not understand the kind of access fat women need. So, how do we get access when people don't understand? Because when people don't understand, they put fat experiences out of their minds and forget that we exist. I asked, how can we feel more accepted? One way is by being given more options. And how might we access options when we are forgotten? I looked at the plus-size consumer space because it's getting more attention, but fat women still face a lack of options in goods and services, which comes from underfunding because of the myth that the plus-size market is oversaturated, which is untrue. This myth exists because investors don't know much about the market because less than 10% of VC decision makers are women, and almost none of them are plus size. In response, I developed Plus Futures, a community-based microloan platform supporting fat femme-owned businesses working to increase fat-accessible consumer options. Plus Futures facilitates microloan transactions and interactions between fat-owned businesses with members of the fat community. Microloan transactions give fat women who are at a higher risk of downward socioeconomic mobility the ability to earn on their loan without taking ownership away from the business owners. Business owners also receive 3 levels of mentorship in business operations, in fat activism, and in community. The pathways for funding traditionally come from VCs or crowdfunding. Plus Futures fits within the growing option for specialty peer-to-peer lending as the first fat-centric lending option. With increased funding, fat women's needs can go from being forgotten to being remembered. I then kept asking why people forget about fat women. It's because for many, we're seen as a joke. It can be difficult to access equity when a group is ridiculed. How can we change that? Through positive fat exposure that normalizes fat bodies, we can reduce points of ridicule, such as through increased media representation of fat beauty. But are there other pathways of celebratory fat representation? As I began my research, I was served products telling me how fat is a joke, how to hide fat, or how fat is deadly. None of these products are celebratory, so I asked, why is our physical manifestation of fat related to ridicule or death? Can we subvert that and tie fat with life? How can products that give us life, such as drinking vessels, be a source of celebration? Venus Bebere, a new drinkware line, brings that fat-positive celebration to the physical form. Venus Bebere complements the home in a range of colorways and cups and pitchers and celebrates the fat form at the same time, which increases visual exposure and hopefully leads to a greater appreciation of fat people. And once fat people see ourselves more represented, we can be empowered to reclaim space and peace. By seeing fat form outside of our familiar limited narratives, we can go from being ridiculed to being celebrated. But representation is only part of moving forward. We need to be celebrated without scrutiny too. How can we address the scrutiny that comes from visibility so people can take up space in peace? What fat women want is to just be with others who look like us and do what we are told we cannot do. Something we're told we can't do is eat. Eating as a fat woman is shamed because food is seen as dangerous and harmful, and fat bodies are too. So how might we create a dining experience for fat women without shame and scrutiny? Through the Fat Positive Dinner, I developed a food-positive, co-created experience for primarily fat femmes and allies to create community through nourishment. The dinner began with participants looking through fat-positive literature and art, to get everyone comfortable in a fat-safe space, to reflect on fat positivity and food positivity, and share our stories of food joy and empowerment during the meal. With two objectives: to create a safe, fat-considerate food space, and to do that in fat community, which was done by asking people to contribute their memories of food joy and empowerment, which were printed for the dinner, and used to source the meal, such as this example of pan de sal that brought memories of joy. These stories are compiled into a recipe book to be distributed to the fat community. And this experience altogether creates an example that shows what a fat-liberated community could look like. So we could go from a space of being scrutinized to just existing in a world of fat liberation. Through this thesis, I saw that my experiences of anti-fat bias are real, painful, and upheld by the structures around us. But we have the power to change those structures. As designers, that is what we should strive for, to be truly holistic and human-centered. For further research, please reference this list of sources. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your framework, working from anti-fat bias to fat liberation, was not automatic, and there was a lot of connective tissue between. I actually want to ask you about the role of language maybe next, but can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to configure these projects together in a way that not only made sense to you, but might make sense to people who weren't familiar with their work until today?
Sure. So originally, as we saw, that I just put up that my projects fit within a pathway of going from a current world of anti-fat bias to fat liberation. But originally, when I started each project, I was really interested in looking at the fact that like fat discrimination as a whole is generally like based on micro interactions and very small like pointed experiences. So I wanted to look at where there were a lot of instances of people responding to those fat shaming interactions, and like because there's a whole list of unsaid like fat rules that people follow, and so I was looking at multiple areas where there was like for the airplane seat, for example, there were so many behaviors I looked up of people being like, okay, flying on a plane is really difficult, so I'm either not going to fly on a plane anymore, I'm going to try to like get my seat early, book an extra second seat, or I'm going to try not to get up out of the seat, so I'm not going to eat for hours. I'm going to take a diuretic suppressant, and just have like a whole laundry list of stuff. Exactly. So I was really interested in like those behaviors lead to so many people internalizing the belief that something is wrong with them if they don't fit into those spaces, instead of questioning these spaces that weren't made for me. So how can we change that interaction point to reduce instances of fat shaming and pain, instead of having the other person change those behaviors? Like I had someone I spoke to a few years ago who is a product maker as well, and she told me that the products she makes were made for people to change themselves, and she would not change her products to have people fit into them. Mm-hmm. So I thought that that didn't make any sense, and why are we holding on to these rigid structures and products that are like regulating how people can exist? So instead of doing that, looking into how we can change products and spaces and services to like accommodate people.
It's amazing to hear you talk about this, because something that I have marveled at is your ability to negotiate between the personal, the individual, the group, the collective, and the culture, and not ignoring business. I remember it was a question about the airline. The margins for airline profits are so narrow, and yet you were able to show, the consumer happiness score. Tell me.
Yes, so the net promoter score,
yeah.
The customer loyalty
like
score.
Jumped high.
Yes, very high.
The language: obstructed, discouraged, forgotten, ridiculed, scrutinized, and then of course you turn those words into their like dichotomous, not really opposite, but a complement. The role of language seemed to really play a huge part in here. Was it fascinating to learn language, to be able to express language, and to coin some language for you?
Yes, definitely. Before I started this project, I mostly didn't have a way to articulate my own lived experience, which, as I said, is not even as extreme for other people. And so the language that I did have came from memoirs and other fat activism resources regarding like the body positivity movement. So like the more I've been doing research and talking to people and learning more about how people express their bodies, what I saw was like basically like what's most important is how you describe your own body and like letting other people take that initiative for themselves. So yeah.
Amazing to talk to you about this. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Margarita.